I was looking to play Mario Kart Double Dash the other day, and my experience went a little something like this.
Let's go!
I don't need friends, they disappoint me.
I'm Vacation, and these are my control schemes for playing Mario Kart Double Dash with one controller. If you know what you're doing, links are in the description. This video is going to showcase two separate setups, one that is a bit more practical than the other. The practical one feels no different from the single player controls. It gives you the option to side bash and get a bigger boost off the starting line. The more creative setup, that I started as a joke but ended up really liking, essentially splits your controller in half. Left side is player 1, right side is player 2. It sounds horrible, and there is definitely a learning curve, but I'll demonstrate why I actually like it. The first setup, Mario Kart DD No Friends, is the one that makes more sense. The idea was to give you the extra abilities of two-player mode, while only using one controller. To achieve this, I basically doubled the inputs for the controller. So X on the DS4 presses A for player 1 and 2. However, I had to modify a few things. The triggers for the back character do the corresponding directional side bash. I made the driver's triggers activate on a normal press, while double pressing the triggers activates the side bash. It can be used to reposition your cart. The more useful application is to steal another cart's items by bashing into them. The chance for this to happen is rare, but when you pull it off, it feels filthy. Passing items is done by simply pressing the item button while the back character doesn't have anything. I should also mention that swapping positions feels just like single player. Since the input for the Z button on both controllers is mapped to R1, there's no need to time anything. Super boosts are done by simply pressing the X button at the correct time. Once again, since the single button is mapped to both controllers, there's no need to time two button presses. Also, when selecting carts, you will be selecting both players at once. The idea is to use the left analog stick to highlight the player you want to be player 1, and then use the D-pad to highlight player 2's character. Once you have both choices highlighted, press X on the DS4 controller, which selects both of them at the same time. I'd also recommend using the D-pad to select the cart afterwards. This setup works because Steam flip-flops between two different layers. The layers are labeled by the person driving. You switch the layers by pressing R1, which also switches the drivers anyway. The goal is to make switching layers practically invisible. The one thing to remember is that player 1 always starts the race by driving. To account for this, I mapped L1 on the player 2 layer to switch to the player 1 layer, and L1 on the player 1 layer is mapped to nothing. Basically, before you start a race, mash the L1 button to assure that you are on the correct layer. The second setup, MKDD, A Tale of Two Karts, is where things get a little funky. Inspired by Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons, the idea is that the left half of your controller is player 1 and the right side is player 2. I started making this as a joke because I thought it would be funny to have some people tear their hair out. And while, yes, it definitely takes a race or two to get used to, the advantages are kind of great. I'll go over the inputs first, then the use case that I found. To have this setup make some sort of sense, I moved some inputs around. A on the GameCube controller is now mapped to each player's trigger. Drifting moved from the triggers to each player's bumper. The D-pad on player 1's side and the face buttons on player 2's side mirror each other. Left and right on the D-pad, in square and circle, are the player's respective bash buttons. Up and down on the D-pad, and triangle and X, are both item buttons. It's worth noting that A for the back character is also the item button. It's much easier to use the triggers for items, in my opinion. If player 1 is driving, you need to hit player 2's item/bash buttons, and vice versa. To aim the item forward or backwards, you also need to use the back player's analog stick. So, if player 1 is driving and you want to throw a green shell backwards, you need to press R2 while holding down on the right analog stick. Also, since the idea of this setup is that your left and right hand are two different players, you need to time your button presses for the turbos and starting boosts. To boost off the start, press both triggers at the same time. To switch drivers, press L3 and R3 at the same time. Now, I said there was a positive to this setup, right? The huge advantage that this weird control scheme gives you is the ability to get boost while drifting like nobody's business. You can charge boost independently of cornering. The best examples I can find are taking the spiral in Waluigi's Stadium or Bowser's Castle extremely tight while getting off 3 to 4 boosts. Once you get the hang of it, you can snake with the best of them. As always, if you want to use these, just add Dolphin to Steam and follow the links in the description for the Steam config and the Dolphin profiles. Hopefully, these setups can provide some new spice on a new playthrough, or make your first time playing this game even better, or weirder. If you have any issues with these configs or requests for future setups, please leave me a comment. I try to respond as quickly as possible. I also have a playlist with several other configurations I've made. My Skyward Sword and Metroid 2 configs are my favorite ones so far, although this one was pretty fun to make as well. Otherwise, have a great day.